The far right have waged war on refugees from countries that are struggling with violence, corruption, authoritarianism, and inequality. Millions of people across the developed world have been convinced that it is these people who are the reason why their country is failing.
Build that wall. Build that wall. Build that wall.
What they don't know is that they are much closer to being in the shoes of these refugees because of the people who have convinced them that refugees are the problem.
If this is not a national security emergency, I don't know what is.
Darren Acemoglu writes in his book, Why Nations Fail, The Origins of Power, Prosperity, and Poverty. Whether it is North Korea, Sierra Leone, or Zimbabwe, will show that poor countries are poor for the same reason that Egypt is poor. Countries such as Great Britain and the United States became rich because their citizens overthrew the elites who controlled power and created a society where political rights were much more broadly distributed, where the government was accountable and responsive to citizens, and where the great mass of people would take advantage of economic opportunities. Essentially, in order for a nation to succeed, the whole population needs to be able to thrive and become productive members of society. European and North American countries became rich and successful because they more evenly distributed rights and opportunity instead of only allowing the wealthiest in the population to enjoy them. Workers' rights and the creation of the welfare state were huge contributors to these countries' successes. And this makes sense. Think of how many scientists, inventors, and businessmen would not have been able to achieve success if they had been born in countries with extreme poverty and corruption. This is why you don't hear of a lot of great minds from countries like Somalia, South Sudan, or Yemen. It's not because there aren't great minds in these countries, it's because civil war and extreme inequality have prevented them the opportunity to learn and develop their capabilities. Social inequality is another huge factor. Countries that limit women's rights, for example, perform poorly across multiple metrics. Decree 770 was signed by Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu in 1967 to 1989. It heavily restricted abortion and contraception, which led to a dramatic increase in maternal and child mortality rates. Women died from back alley abortions and children from lack of proper care due to their mothers' poor economic situations. The high birth rate also overwhelmed the state's ability to care for the children born during this time. Decree 770 had a significant negative impact on Romania's economy as it contributed to strained resources and economic hardship. The persecution of any demographic on the grounds of sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, or ethnicity also contributes to a country's failure. The most extreme example of this, of course, was the Holocaust. If Albert Einstein had not been able to flee Nazi Germany, one of the greatest minds in science would never have been known to the world. In 2025, the country with the highest amount of wealth inequality is South Africa, due to its history with apartheid that deliberately concentrated wealth amongst the white minority. Apartheid directly contributed to the stifling of the South African economy, to which the effects are still being felt today. Essentially, nations fail because they prioritize the top 1% of the population at the expense of the other 99%. And this is exactly why the US is going to fail too. Trump's Big Beautiful Bill will essentially be the largest transfer of wealth from the poor to the wealthy in America's history. Millions of Americans will lose their healthcare and food stamps. And for what? So Trump's donors can increase their wealth. Not only does his Big Beautiful Bill include major tax cuts for the rich, his actions over recent months have helped his rich donors. In February of 2025, the US hit its lowest score ever on an international corruption measure. Corruption is defined in the Cambridge Dictionary as illegal, bad, or dishonest behavior, especially by people in positions of power. So, like the president using insider trading to help his rich friends make more money.
He made $2.5 billion today, and he made $900 million. That's too bad. He's in financial.
Even the whole migrant crisis was manufactured to help his rich donors. In March, it was reported that Trump's removal rate of undocumented immigrants was 10% lower than Biden's. And yet ICE has been arresting thousands of people every week. Where are they putting all of these immigrants if they aren't deporting them? They are cramming them in for-profit detention centers. Private prison firms, Geo Group and Core Civic both donated handsomely to Trump's 2024 presidential campaign, anticipating that business would boom under his tough immigration policies. Over the last few months, the Trump administration has worked to expand for-profit immigration detention centers. Multiple reports have confirmed these centers are overcrowded with inhumane conditions.
Do you believe that you were kept in there because you were a moneymaker?
Yes, I do. I believe that all the women in there are kept in there as long as possible, transferred around, because it's a business. and they make money off of us. That's the only explanation that I could come up with, because I said from day one I would pay for my ticket to go home. The amount of wasted resources that I witnessed in there, the inhumane conditions, they did everything they can to cut costs.
Trump's claim that the people being detained are criminals is false. ICE data shows that 72% of people who are detained have no criminal record. In fact, his whole argument that undocumented immigrants are posing a threat to Americans is false. Immigrants, both legal and illegal, commit less crime than American citizens. Contrary to what the Trump administration wants Americans to believe, violent crime in the U.S. is on a 30-year decline. This whole ploy to make Americans fear immigrants was constructed to help Trump win the election and put money in his donors' pockets. Fear is the most useful emotion to control the masses. Trump isn't the first person to utilize this for his benefit, and he won't be the last.
Nearly 180,000 illegal immigrants with criminal records ordered deported from our country are tonight roaming free to threaten peaceful citizens.
Women are raped at levels that nobody's ever seen before.
Build that wall. Build that wall. Build that wall.
Trump has successfully convinced a certain subset of the American population that undocumented immigrants deserve to be eaten by alligators, also that he and his donors can make more money. And it's not just immigrants whose human rights are being revoked.
At the Supreme Court today, an historic upheaval. In a sweeping ruling that overturned a half a century of precedents, 5 justices ended the right of American women to choose abortion under the Constitution.
In his first term, Trump elected 3 Republican Supreme Court justices that were pivotal in the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. Since then, multiple states have introduced incredibly strict abortion laws, and multiple women have died as a result. And things have only gotten worse for women since Trump took office for his second term. In June, Trump rescinded Biden-era guidance clarifying that states with strict abortion bans cannot turn pregnant patients away who are in the midst of medical emergencies. This was a key element of Project 2025, and if they continue with their plans, abortion will eventually be restricted throughout the entirety of the U.S. As Romania has proved, when countries dictate strict abortion laws, child and maternal mortality rates increase. There's also a plethora of evidence to suggest the U.S. states that have implemented abortion bans have had an increased amount of infant deaths and higher rates of child poverty. Not only is the U.S. going to become a failing nation because of what's happening within its borders, it's also going to fail because of how it's treating its allies and trading partners. Countries outside the U.S. are already strengthening ties with each other as a way to limit dependence on American trade. De-dollarization, or the reduction in the U.S. dollar being used as the reserve currency, is growing as a result of increased polarization due to ongoing tariff wars. JP Morgan states, de-dollarization could shift the balance of power among countries, and this could, in turn, reshape the global economy and markets. The impact would be most acutely felt in the U.S., where de-dollarization would likely lead to a broad depreciation and underperformance of U.S. financial assets versus the rest of the world. Trump has only been president for 6 months, and it's already pretty clear where the U.S. is headed. Nations don't fail overnight. It's a gradual process that takes place over years of dehumanization, exploitation, and corruption. All we have to do is look at examples from other countries throughout history to understand the path that Trump is leading the U.S. on. It's a path of severe inequality where the average American will continue to get poorer while the wealthy become richer, until the middle class is completely eroded and all that's left is the poor and the wealthy. And this is not just happening in the U.S. This right-wing rhetoric is becoming rampant throughout the West as increased destabilization from the Middle East and Africa is causing more and more irregular migration and people seeking asylum. Right-wing populist politicians are using the asylum crisis to garner fear and intimidation while the global wealthy become richer. In the last few years, global billionaire wealth has increased substantially, with an increase of $2 trillion in 2024 alone. With such a high wealth concentration at the top, it is very easy for the 1% to manipulate governments and media in their favor. We need to look at the US as a warning of what could play out in our countries if we let far-right populism win. The fact of the matter is, you are much closer to becoming an asylum seeker than you are a billionaire.